It's great to be a part of GMAT Club's session today. Thank you for the opportunity for having me here. So I'm Vikram Shah. I'm the founder of Vikram Shah Consulting. We're a consulting firm which is differentiated by a unique success fee model, which ensures that we're completely invested in the client's success. Let me not spend more time on that, but let me just tell you a little bit more about myself before we start. My background is in marketing. I'm a marketing specialist with experience in advertising, marketing, communications, branding, etc. So for those of you who've joined the chat, let me put things in perspective of how we're going to go about this. We're going to spend the first few minutes on talking on open-ended essays. Then we're going to go to goals. Then we're going to go to miscellaneous essay topics, such as optional essays, reapplication essays. And after that, I will open questions to the floor. So anyone who's planning for specific answers on specific topics, you can join in accordingly. Anyway, this presentation is not going to be very long. The idea is to answer as many questions as possible. So let's get started. So today's topic is, just give me a second. There we go. Essays that you fear most. So I think the first question I have, I know that where does fear come from? It's not something that you really think about being scared of an essay, but I think fear generally comes from a lack of clarity. The problem with most stories, I feel, and people who are struggling with a particular essay usually is because they lack clarity. They're not sure of what their message is. So when you're approaching an essay, be clear about the message that you want to deliver. And I think that's the most important part. If you solve this, you solved half the problem. The second part is provide evidence for whatever you're talking about. So before I go any further, how do you know you actually have a problem with an essay? So I think if you realize that you have too many choices of examples, too many choices in terms of evidence as such, then you probably have a problem. If you have too many words, say you're at 2,000 words, you have a 500-word essay, you probably lack clarity. And that's, again, where you're probably going to struggle with the particular essay. The third possible reason is, if you're trying to say something you feel someone else wants to hear and you're not being genuine, then you probably are going to run into problems with your essay. Here's some advice. My objective today is to help you gain clarity, to give you some hacks on how you could gain some clarity and approach essays. So just some general advice. Don't write an essay from the perspective of what you think someone else wants to hear. I think you should write from the perspective of what you really want to say. I think don't rush into an essay. Don't look at a first draft and say, oh, this is not so good. I think you need to give yourself time on an essay. You need to introspect. You need to be willing to go back to the drawing board. So give yourself some time. Think of it like baking a cake. Not all of us are bakers. It's something that we've all been doing during the lockdown. So that's the reason why I'm using this analogy. But as such, I'm not a good baker. If I go into a kitchen, I really need to see each ingredient. I really need to see the entire process. I need to know how long I'm going to take on different aspects of it. So in that sense, I would say, follow steps. Give yourself time to go through every step. It's very unlikely that I'm going to go into the kitchen, put together different ingredients and come out like a natural. So think of yourself as an inexperienced baker. Go through steps. Chances are you come up with something far better, far more delicious than with something which is just piecemeal. So with that, I would say reiterate by saying, give yourself time on essays, take small steps, Don't be in a rush. Be willing to go from edit 1 to edit 5, just in terms of sorting out your content. Don't try and churn out the writing style. That comes later. A lot of people just open an essay and they start writing, and they're more focused on the writing style. They say, oh, it doesn't read well, it's got this, it's got that. But then they're missing content. I think content is far more important. So we'll first try to drill into the content, identify the key content, and then you can churn it. So let's get started with that. So let's first start talking about open-ended essays. I'm going to do this slightly differently. So open-ended essays, this guide will help you tackle questions by Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Yale, etc. I think people really struggle with open-ended essays for a number of reasons. One is because it's open-ended. One of the first questions will come to my mind is, how many words should I really use? Sometimes people say, oh, I should do only 400 words. Sometimes I should use 1,000 words. I think don't make that decision immediately, but as far as possible, try and be concise. Less is more. So if you use less words and you can send out the same message, it'll be far more impactful. And that'll be the general advice. I find that a lot of people also struggle with tackling an open-ended essay as the very first essay. Sometimes it's better to start with the application of a school which has a more direct essay, something like a Kellogg which says, what is your greatest leadership experience? Or you choose any other school which has a very direct question. I think it makes it easier to answer. You get a chance to churn out stories. You get a chance to introspect. You get a chance to learn how to write an essay, and then it'll help you craft some of these open-ended essays. But if you have to attempt this first, then let me give you some guidelines as well. And we'll start with HBS. So typically, HBS has a question which says, what more would you like us to know when we consider your candidacy? And I think when you tackle this, so I've created a table, and this is just a guideline on how you can tackle it. For me to brainstorm, you can put down a bunch of things that you think the school which sets you apart. Sorry, not what school, but things which set you apart, and things that the school is looking for. So HBS is very strong on leadership. So you may want to quote an anecdote of leadership, but something which sets you apart as such. You may want to talk about, identify a theme and start brainstorming. You may say, oh, this is a passion. It's not coming out anywhere else in my application. Perhaps I want to talk about that. Perhaps you want to talk about a value. Maybe a value of persistence, or you want to talk about resilience. Ask yourself, where have I demonstrated it? Create a table, start putting in your content into the table. And you can do as much brainstorming on this as possible. Perhaps you want to talk about something which has motivated you, or the driving factor behind an achievement. And that'll help you get some clarity. So the purpose of this exercise is essentially to help you get clarity and identify the sort of topics that you want to talk about. And you want to be prepared before you start jumping into the essays. So, for example, if you pick an example and you say, let me talk about persistence, which is a value which has really been the driving force behind my success, and you want to give a couple of examples of that, create a table, put in your values out there, churn out your content in that as well. Ask yourself, where have I demonstrated persistence? How have I demonstrated persistence? So this is just a basic tool on what I encourage people to do. It's good to ask yourself what schools are looking for. So if you're because Harvard is looking for leadership, whenever you're approaching an essay, make sure that it's showing some theme of leadership and showing some of your leadership qualities as such. I'm going to give you another example of how to use a similar table to brainstorm for another school and how to build on this very, very basic idea. So let's try it with Stanford's essay, what matters most to you and why? And this is what I find that most people tend to struggle with this essay for a number of reasons, because it's so open-ended. And whenever I find people introspect, sometimes they always come back and saying, but my ideas are so cliche. I think it's important when you're approaching a topic like this that you be honest with yourself, and to brainstorm on what really matters to you, you make a list of topics. It could be chasing my dreams. It could be being true to myself, pushing boundaries, not settling for mediocrity. It could be any of these. You could go even deeper. Then you ask yourself, why is this particular topic or idea important to me? Why is this what matters most to me? And give yourself a good reason. So if my topic was chasing dreams, then maybe in that, by chasing dreams, each time I become more capable. You'll come up with a variety of answers. In the third column, you add examples. Give an example of how you've chased a personal dream, what you've achieved, the sort of struggles that you've overcome to achieve that. You'll get a sense of who you are. You'll start getting content as well. You'll get a bunch of examples. If you're short on examples, perhaps that's not the right topic for you. What I also find is sometimes that people do things the other way around, especially people who've worked on applications for multiple schools. They have some ready-made content and they say, can I rejig this? Can I use this existing content and make it relevant to this? And they try and work backwards. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you're going to do it that way, I would say at least make your examples relevant to the question and relevant to your story. I think it's not something which I am comfortable with because it doesn't show true introspection, but each to his own. I would just say don't copy paste an example from another school or this essay from another school without making it relevant. You can have a similar theme, but the topic and the content may change. So think about it from that perspective, but try this table in terms of brainstorming and identifying what matters most to you. Choose your examples, then rank your examples. See which ones work best. We're going to try the same table approach with Kellogg's essay. What values are important to you and how have they influenced you? So you can do the same approach by making a list of values in column 1 of a table. Call it values, and it can be persistence, it could be community service, it could be integrity, it could be anything else. It could be collaboration. You have a bunch of values there. Then you ask yourself, why is this value important to you? And you come up with a genuine reason, something that you really hold close to you, something which has helped really shape you into who you are today. Then you think of examples of where you've displayed this value. It could be a personal example, it could be a professional example, and maybe you want to show multiple examples in case you want to provide more evidence. You could create an additional column by asking yourself, where has this value come from? You can create a 5th column if you want to ask yourself, how has this value influenced you? And just by laying it out on a simple sheet, you can choose between topics. You can see which one works for you better than the other. You'll also find a lot of your content for your essay ready in this table as such. Then you can pick and choose, and then you can start writing. So the entire focus of all of these essays is to help you identify a content. The presentation of it comes later. Presentation's boring. Some people say, oh, through this, my essay is going to be very drab. Once you've got your content, then you start decorating your cake. But first you need to bake it. So you can't really have an icing on a cake without even baking the cake, right? So get your content in place. That would be the main suggestion with this. And you can apply this sort of table just to get clarity in the way you approach essays for any sort of open-ended essays, whether it's for Yale. The biggest commitment that I've made, create column 1, the commitment that you've made. It could be a commitment to pursue excellence. It could be anything else. You have a list of commitments. Then you ask yourself, why are you so committed to that? Give yourself examples of commitment. What have you sacrificed in that pursuit? So that commitment could be an idea. It could be a value. Remember one thing, all of this, when you break it down, it'll help you display to the school your behaviors, your motivations, your values, and give the school a real sense of who you are as an individual. So you can do this for any school. You can do it for Booth as well, but any school which has an open-ended essay. Now, I'm going to move on to a different topic of career goals.
Hi, Vikram. This is
Yes?
Abhijit. Sorry to interrupt. There's a question about Kellogg essay. Can you please answer that before me moving on to the
I'm
next
so
question?
sorry.
From TJ Pumpkin, the last one.
I'm
Did you
missing
see
the
in the
question.
chat box?
Let me just switch out and take a look. Do examples have to be developed in a long way, or can they just be listed briefly? I think when you are brainstorming, you want to list out examples very, very briefly. The idea is not to go deep into them, initially at least. But supposing the question is about values. So when you're talking about the Kellogg values essay, if you're saying persistence is important to me and that's the value I'm going by, and you want to give an example of a time when you showed persistence, maybe you had an injury, but you really wanted to commit to a particular sport and you really pushed through, and you'll spend about 2-3 lines explaining persistence and then how that value is ingrained in you. And then you may want to talk about how it's influenced you even in your professional career. And that's the way I would go about it. Try and give 2 examples, one from your personal life and one from your professional life. I hope that answers the question.
All
Yes.
right, can move
So
on. Thank you.
so we're going to continue. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk about career essays because I think this is a topic which is extremely critical. And this is also a place where a lot of people go wrong. And you see a lot of people getting a ding from a school because of their career goals essays as such. Okay. Yeah. Just give me a second. Yes. Okay. So career goals essays, let me tell you when you're more likely to run into trouble. Signs of trouble are when you have a goal which really doesn't require to pursue an MBA. Suppose, so let me give you an example of that. I'm at a consulting firm. I want to move from a consultant to an associate consultant position, or I want to start my own bakery. Maybe I don't need an MBA for that. Maybe if I'm already at a consulting firm, I just continue along the normal career path without investing $100,000, $200,000. I can already move there through the natural course, right? So you really want to think, do you really need an MBA to achieve that goal? Another reason you could say you're possibly in trouble is if your goal is too ambitious or unrealistic. It should be believable at the end of it. Supposing you say, my goal is to become the CEO of a Fortune 100 company or a Fortune 500 company. Ask yourself in reality, how many people are joining B school? How many people are graduating from B school? And if you track everyone's career path, I mean, what are the chances of a person becoming CEO of a Fortune 100 company? So make sure it's not unrealistic. It's fine to say you're going to be in a leadership position, and you can spell that out as well. But being a little unrealistic is something that we don't advise. I think if your goals are too convoluted or vague, then you know you're in trouble. So what do I mean by that? If you're taking about 4 or 5 or 6 lines to explain a goal, or you can't articulate it in a single sentence, then I think you already know you're in trouble. A sign of being vague is I want to switch. Okay, I wouldn't say I want to switch, but I'd say I want to be a leader in finance. I want to become a thought leader in marketing. So I think that's vague. Some people write other stuff like, I want to make lots of money, repay my loans, and then become an entrepreneur. I think if I'm an entrepreneur, chances are that if I have an idea today, the idea is relevant today. I'm going to pursue that today. It may not be relevant 5 years from now. No entrepreneur is going to wait on an idea and say, I'm going to do that only once I have enough money. If an entrepreneur believes in an idea, he or she will raise that money. They will pursue it and they'll build a business. And you may get resources from the school as well. You never know. So your idea your goals should be believable as such. Okay. So the important thing when you're writing your career goals, make sure that your goal requires you to pursue an MBA. I think that's the most important part. Make sure they're realistic and yet ambitious at the same time. The most important part about it is link your past to your goals. There should be some evidence. So say you're an IT professional, your family has a hospital, you've done nothing in that area, but you say post MBA, I want to join my family business and I want to pursue healthcare and hospital management. How would someone believe that? Just because your family's done it? If you were that interested in it, there should be some evidence that you've at least pitched in during summer, that you've done some work there for some time. So it should link to your past in some ways or the other. And I think that's the most important part. And lastly, whatever goal you write, please research and validate it. Don't write a goal just for the sake of it. So what do I mean by research? Don't make up or imagine positions. If you want to pursue a role at Amazon and you're saying, oh, I want to do data analytics at Amazon, go on the website and see, do they recruit MBAs for those positions or no? Do these positions even exist? Someone says, I want to drive strategy for ExxonMobil. Maybe ExxonMobil doesn't even have strategy positions. I'm just giving random examples. These are not validated. So I'm just telling you, whenever you look at a goal, make sure you do your research. And it would be great if you find someone from the school who's followed a similar career path. If you have that, you can make a reference to that as well. So validate your goals. Have conversations with people from the school about your goals. See if it makes sense. See if the school has the resources to help you with that. So if your goal is about entrepreneurship as such, and you're saying, I want to work in the incubator, but the school doesn't have an incubator, then you're in problems, right? So research your goals. If you're saying you want to get into consulting or venture capital or some of these sort of areas, that's fine. Just validate them, yeah? Okay. We're going to talk about optional essays now. And I think the biggest question I have is, should I attempt it at all? So I think when you're looking at an optional essay, you want to look at the interpretation of it. And I think most of the time, schools give you a clue within the question itself. So in the past, even today, some questions still ask, is there any information you would like the admissions committee to know about you? Or sometimes they will ask, use this section to briefly describe any accentuating circumstances. And there's a difference. If it's the latter, only if there's something accentuating that you need to tell the school, that's when you should use the optional essay. You don't want to tell them about an achievement which you didn't get an opportunity to talk about elsewhere in the application. Perhaps they're not looking for that information, or perhaps you've not communicated it well enough through other parts of it. But don't use the optional essay for this. So for a school like ISB, which has an optional essay, for many years we've encouraged candidates to use it as a means to sell themselves to the school as well, because of the way the question was worded. So I think when you're looking at this, look at the interpretation of it before you proceed. General guidelines if you're attempting the optional essay, be very brief. I think be clear on what you want to cover. So you can use it for explaining a choice of recommender. Supposing you're using an unconventional recommender, you're not using someone who's been your direct supervisor. I think that's when you probably would want to explain that in the optional essay, and you can say it in a couple of lines. If you have poor academic performance and you want to explain that, by all means you can. Supposing you want to explain a poor GMAT score, but your academic performance is also weak, then you have to have good reason to convey both. And I still think it's going to be extremely hard to convince someone, especially when you're applying to a top school, that you will perform really well on the MBA program, because there are two instances of which your academic, your performance has not been probably at par. So think about if you want to really point out that weakness, it's just there, they can see it, right? But maybe focus more on the strengths. If you have a gap in your resume, by all means explain it. If a gap is longer than 3 months or 4 months, by all means explain it. And use this also as a opportunity to explain a reason to pursue a second MBA or other such opportunity, such stories which you've not had a chance to explain elsewhere in the application. So that's with optional essays. We're now going to talk about reapplicant essays. And what should you put in a reapplicant essay? And I think the most important part about reapplication essay is showing improvement and self-reflection. So if you applied, say, in round 3 last year and taken advantage of the opportunity that many B schools gave of accepting an application without a GMAT score, you rushed in an application. So maybe you want to show that self-reflection out there. So use that as an opportunity to show some self-reflection and question, if you've not made it to school, why didn't you make it? Was it a low GMAT score? Was it that you rushed in your application, you didn't communicate your goals properly, or you didn't communicate your stories well enough? You also want to demonstrate improvement. So within, let's say you applied in round 3 last year and now in round 1, there's been no improvement. You still want to show something. If you've not taken the GMAT, I'm assuming you've taken the GMAT by now. So you would have something to show. You can show any sort of improvement, professional in terms of additional responsibility, greater leadership roles, a new designation, a promotion, academic accomplishments, in case you've taken any online courses, community service, or any other personal accomplishments. But it's important when you're reapplying that you show some improvement. And lastly, you could talk also about your commitment to the school in a reapplication essay and your fit with the school. So if you focus on these 3 key things, I think you should have a strong reapplication essay. And again, coming back to guidelines in terms of what your word limit should be, I think keep it brief, as crisp as possible. Most schools anyway will ask you to be very brief. So let me conclude just this bit on essays which candidates tend to struggle with by saying that when you're applying to school, focus more on your strengths. No essay topic is meant to be difficult. You just need to break it down and simplify it and interpret it in a manner which will allow you to communicate your story. Be genuine with your essays. Please introspect before you jump into it. Even if you're using a consultant, don't say my consultant told me to do this. You should be able to sell that story. You should believe in it. It really shines. Sometimes when I read an essay, I can say, I mean, this guy hasn't put in heart and soul into it. When you're writing an essay, let the essay be based on your experiences, not on what your experiences of your parents, of your brother, your sister, etc. I think that's not personal enough. So it should be about something that you've experienced, and your essays will be far more, I think, clear. They will sell you in a much better way as well. And lastly, show evidence for everything that you're saying. So if you're saying that resilience is a value that I really stand by, and which has really been the driving force behind my career, then give me evidence of how you've shown resilience. You can give me 1 example, you can give me 2. That's fine. So with that, I'd like to throw open the floor to questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions on any sort of essay topics that you may be struggling with. So, yeah. One thing you want to improve in yourself, and what are you doing to improve upon it? ISB, the YLP essay. So I think if the question is how do you approach this, I think you want to identify, make a list of areas that you think you need to improve upon and why you want to improve upon that, and you create a table. The 3rd column would be, what are you doing to improve upon it? So supposing it's public speaking, for example, make a list. You'll say, okay, column 1, I want to improve in public speaking. Column 2, why? It could be because you're lacking in confidence. It could be because that you've had a fear of the stage and you want to overcome stage fright. And you can you can give an example of steps that you've taken in that regard. So I think if you reflect on the topic, it talks a little bit about self-awareness, about initiative, and the drive to improve. And you're talking about those sort of values. So you can show this in any regard. So I hope that answers the question how you can approach the topic. This is another one from Satya Prakash. Can I mention the name of a current student alumni in my goals essay? By all means, you can. However, on the same note, I would say try not to mention names of your boss and your colleagues in your essays. Okay, how do you choose the value you want to talk about and how do you explain it? So again, like I said, create a table, make a list of the values which are important to you, and ask yourself, why are these important? Now, if a value is important to you, its chances are that you would have demonstrated it somewhere in your life. So make a list of those instances where you've demonstrated. Once you've made a list of those instances, you know which instance ranks higher than the others. And automatically, you can match it. The most important thing in this is the why. So I think you need to focus on that. Let's take the next question. Should you mention your weakness? It really depends upon what context. So if you're applying to a particular school, let's say Harvard, and you want to show a weakness, if it's part of your story, sure. I don't think there's anything wrong in showing a weakness as well, but it really depends upon the context. If there's no reason for it, then I would say, why show it? As far as possible, try to keep your essay as positive and focus more on your strengths than your weaknesses. If the weakness is an area of improvement that you intend to work upon at school, then sure, you could mention it somewhere in your application. Okay. Any reference of YouTube links or tips on writing essays while applying for ISB? I think if you just Google, you'll find many tips on and many suggestions on how to approach essays. So you can also visit GMAT Club, and there's a forum there, and they have lots of tips out there as well. So I think this question is not really relevant to this topic. This is, would you advise someone with 2 years experience to go for an MBA? So it's got nothing to do with how to tackle essays which someone's struggling with. But I think if you're ready to do an MBA, by all means, go ahead. I think ask yourself what your career goals are and then see if it makes sense for you to do it right now or no. Please provide a personal statement of how you will contribute to the experience of others in the program, how the executive MBA will benefit you. So I think how you will contribute to the other experience of others, I think you need to delve into your experience and see how will that uniquely position you. If you're a consultant and you've got experience across different industries, then perhaps that consulting experience will help you in various case studies, etc. If you've been very good at solving problems or very good at analytics, or you're an accountant and you can share that sort of learning in class or in case studies, I think those are areas in which you can touch upon as well. But don't restrict yourself only to class. I think you also want to touch upon and show diversity. So you should touch upon how you contribute inside the classroom and outside the classroom as well, and perhaps even in the community in various clubs. And that's the way I will try and match it. And as far as the second part of the question, how will the executive MBA program benefit you? I think that is a reflection on your goals, because you know how the MBA benefit, what the MBA program is offering you. And then you need to link it to your goals from an academic perspective, from a network perspective, etc. What difference will you make as a member of the MBA class at school? Yes, this is a topic for Tepper. I think you want to ask yourself, what differentiates you as an applicant? What value do you bring to class? So you could dwell onto your background. You could ask yourself, okay, come from a particular industry, which allows you to think in a particular way. You bring that experience. You could talk about how engaged you've been in the community and how that will allow you to contribute to the community as well. If you want to talk, if you have a lot of leadership experience, you can talk about your specific leadership experiences and how that will help you contribute not only to your teams, but also to topics on leadership, etc. So I think you need to introspect and ask yourself what differentiates you, or what are my strengths, and what are the aspects of the program that I can link it to. What unique knowledge and experience do you hope to contribute to the program? I think this relates to the previous question I just answered. Again, you need to delve deep into what differentiates you as a candidate in terms of your experience, in terms of your skills, and then link that to the program. You can link it to specific aspects, maybe to a marketing course, or you could link it to even clubs or to even extracurricular activities. So I think if you do that matching, you'll be able to answer this question. We're ready for the next. And I think, or is that all? Contribution to the community. Okay. So I think you want to first define community. Are you talking about only the school's community or the community where the school is situated as well? And when you look at both of them, then you ask yourself where the opportunities. So if you look at the community at school, what are the opportunities which will allow you to contribute? It could be clubs, it could be networking events, it could be social service activities. So within those, try and find the right fit. And again, when you're finding a fit, ideally it'll be good if you showed evidence. So if you say, I've been engaged in social service with a particular NGO or a particular activity here, and at school, I would like to continue giving back to the community, then I would possibly believe that. So try and find a link and link it to how you could contribute. Otherwise, it's just a wish list. And a lot of it is unbelievable by saying, I will do this, I will do that. So that's the way I would approach it. How do you know your essay is final? How do you judge your own essay? Okay, so I think, like I said, the most important thing when you start an essay and approaching an essay, be clear about the message. What do you want to show? So if your goal is to demonstrate leadership, is that value coming out? I also think my essay writing style is very different. It's very, very simple and it's very direct and to the point, but it makes it an easy read. If your essay requires you to go back and read it again and again and try and understand what the writer is trying to communicate, then you have a problem. I think if your essay is easy to understand, you can do it in one read, you remember most of the contents, then I think it's a great essay. So in terms of final, I think you need to take a call as well when enough is enough. I think sometimes when you read an essay, if you're just making minor changes to words and you're going back and forth, then perhaps it's fine. If the general idea is coming through, I don't think it matters that much on the different words as such, but the general idea should come through. Things are always open to improvement, and you can keep editing and there'll be no end to it. I go back to an essay after 10 days, I also see that there's scope for improvement. Nothing's ever perfect, right? So by the same logic, I think when you're happy with it, you think the message is coming out, it's clear, it's concise, you've used the right examples, then it's good to go. Do writing skills matter? So I think when you're applying to school, this is not an essay writing competition. So the main focus is on the content of your essay. However, you are applying to school, you do have a lot of tools available to you. You can do a spell check, you can do a grammar check, you should do a proofread. So in that sense, those are the basics which need to be communicated. When you're going to a company, even your business communication is expected to be of a certain level. You wouldn't want too many errors in that. So by the same logic, your school essays should not have errors in it. I do think it's important to give it a read, proofread them. So when you're talking about writing skills, it doesn't have to have flowery language. You don't have to have big words. You should just be able to communicate an idea in plain, simple manner. How do you know if we should go ahead and get our essays edited? I think if you feel that you're struggling with an essay, or you're struggling communicating an idea, then by all means get your essays edited. I think there's a difference between getting essays edited and using a consultant to help you identify the right content. I think the biggest mistakes a lot of candidates make is they focus too much on the flair of writing rather than the content. And a lot of people don't even understand what they're selling. So if you really want to understand what you're selling, then I think you need to break down what you've done and what you bring to the table. And if you focus on that, your content will be good. We're ready for the next question, if there are any more. I hope I've answered all, and I hope I've answered them well. If you have a low GPA, should you address it in the essays? I think if your GMAT score is particularly high and your GPA is low and you have a good reason for it, perhaps you should address it in the optional essay. If your GMAT score is low and your GPA is low, then I think that's a call that you need to take, whether you want to address it or no, because it needs to be believable. If you're saying that your performance was affected during your undergrad for 4 years and you couldn't increase your grades, and your GMAT score also doesn't reflect that academic potential, then perhaps it's difficult to communicate. Perhaps in that sense, it may be better to not address it. So, but otherwise, if you have strong evidence and a good reason for it, by all means, be direct and answer it. What if you don't have a career goal in mind? Okay, so I think there are two different things. One is, from the purpose of getting into B school, you don't have a clear career goal in mind. I think most schools want to see if you know where you're going, if you know what you're getting into, because it's a huge investment. So they want to see some sort of direction as such. I think most schools are also aware that most candidates coming to B school are probably going to be career changers and want to explore different topics, but many schools don't want to hear that. So I think when you're approaching a career goals essay, even if you are fluctuating between number of options or you have no idea, you're essentially doing it because you want to change career tracks. You may not want to write that. You may want to link your past to your future. So let's say you've been in IT consulting. You can say, okay, I've developed solutions which have helped companies solve particular problems, and you can link that towards consulting. Say I want to move from technology consulting to strategy consulting, and that can be some sort of a shift. But you want to see growth, and you want to talk about how you'll move to different roles as such. So that really depends. I think link your past to your future. That's the important part, and demonstrate the reason behind it. And I think then you'll have a good essay. Is it okay to have 2-3 different goals since you have only 2 years experience? So I think from the purpose of what you want to achieve at B school in terms of exploring different options is perfectly fine. If you're exploring different options, I hope you're doing a longer duration program versus a 1-year program. I think some recruiters only recruit via the internship route. So if you want to explore that, you may want to do an internship and choose the right internship. But from the purpose of a goals essay, you cannot have 2-3 different goals. Have a single goal. It's like saying I'm going to the airport and I'm going to fly, buy a ticket either to Bombay or to Delhi or to Pune. I don't know. I'm just going to see which is the next flight which is going to take off. So I don't think that's what schools want to hear. So you want to show some sort of focus. So for an essay perspective, better to show clarity. Once you get into school, do whatever you want. Can LORs be shorter than required? So this topic is about essays, and I think we like to stick to that. If you feel your essay, your manager is not willing to write 500 words, that's fine. I think less is more. Let them say it in less, but make sure that they're at least doing a good job selling you. One more topic on the LORs, since that's, even though that's not related to this, the Harvard questions are shorter than the same questions offered by Stanford. So if you have to use the shorter questions, please use them. Let's move on to the next question. So I think, Ramesh, you need to introspect a little bit more about if asked about single quality of yours, you really need to ask yourself what really stands out and what differentiates you from everyone. So if you introspect, you may have a list of strengths and a list of instances in which you've demonstrated all of those, but it's quite possible that one is shown out more than the others. If you are unable to do that and you think everything is well balanced, then perhaps you pick one which you're most comfortable talking about, or which link better to your achievements, or which has shaped you in a deeper manner as such. So speak about something from any of these, choose one if that's the topic, even though there may be multiple one of those qualities that you think you could sell. Let's take the next question. Okay, so I think when you talk about word limits of essays, I think again you need to interpret the question. So supposing a school says, use your judgment, we have no limit, especially for open-ended essays. If you can say something in less words, by all means do it. So if you look at any ad as well, they have an option of writing a lot of content. They have an option of doing less content. You see some of the best ads in the world have very, very limited content. So sometimes less is more. But as long as you are able to communicate your messages in a concise manner, use your discretion. So if you feel you need 500 words for an essay, use it. Now, for an open-ended essay, if you feel you're not able to communicate that in 500 words, you need to give more evidence, you can go up to 1,000 words as well. But use your discretion. Wherever possible, try and reduce the content. There have been instances where we've seen candidates write 5,000 word essays and they've been accepted at a school as well. But in general, the general trend is to have everything more concise. I think your business communication will also be more concise and just easy explaining a point. So try and be concise. When it comes to schools which have said 500 words and no, they don't specifically say maximum or limit, then understand that is an indication of what they want the length to be. You can go about 5-10% plus or minus. You don't have to be exactly 500 words. You can be there or thereabouts, and that works perfectly fine. When you're talking about essays which have specified word limit, please stick to that word limit. You will not be able to extend that. There are ways of cheating. You can always hyphenate words and do all of that, but school's also smart and sometimes just doesn't read well. So be careful. So that's my take on word limits. Are there any other questions that we would like to talk about? Because I purposely kept the presentation short so we could discuss more essays. I hope I've answered everyone's questions so far. So, Swati, I feel that if you've done a good job communicating your essays and your story through your essays, and you don't have a need to tell anything extra to a school, by all means, do not use the optional essay. If you feel that a certain aspect of you which is not being communicated, say a particular strength, and especially if you're talking about ISB, you could use that essay to communicate that strength. So focus on the positives then, and then not on the negatives. It could be on a particular experience. Maybe you've not had a chance to speak about a leadership experience and an accomplishment anywhere else in your application, but you think it'll be a great seller, then by all means talk about it concisely and explain why you're telling them that story. It could be because you feel the qualities of leadership or the qualities that shine through that accomplishment give the school a perspective of the value that you will bring to the table. Yes, you can write about failures as well. I think a lot of schools have had stories about failure. A lot of candidates and successful candidates have had great stories about failure. So you can talk about that, but you also want to highlight certain qualities of resilience, etc. When you're saying you want to talk only about your vision and how you want to be, I think you want to show that beyond your failure, you've been on a certain path and you've taken certain steps towards that. And at least as long as I see that evidence of that vision and towards that vision, I think your story will be believable. So I think some great essays have been entirely based on failure as well, because they've highlighted certain unique qualities of a person. So I think as long as you show the potential and the quality, if you have the academic potential, you have the leadership experience, or you've got some great experience to really allow you to contribute to school, then by all means you can talk about failures as well. Does your ranking of your university impact your application? In some school cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. So I think the way to think about it is, if you got the resume of someone from Harvard and you got the resume of someone from an unknown school, the resume of the candidate from Harvard will tell you at least that this person has been through something rigorous. That you've been through a pretty rigorous selection process. And I think that's an indication that schools will look at. So if you've been through a school which is known for recruiting high quality candidates, it gives the school that much more confidence. If your school is not so well known, but your academic grades stand out, that's great. Perhaps your professional experience may be able to cover for a little bit that as well, where you've worked with employers which have also been very, very selective. And then maybe that'll help your application. If neither of the two are doing that, maybe at certain schools you could find it as a challenge. But again, focus on your strengths, focus on your story. Okay, so if we fixate on a role or a function, so I think there's a difference between a role and a function. If you want to play the role of a consultant, if you want to play the role of a function, would be more like marketing. I think that's fine, and you can be absolutely flexible with the industry. I think if you're fixated, let's say you want to get into marketing, I wouldn't restrict myself only to, say, FMCG. It could be with any sort of marketing as such, right? I think I'd be very happy with that. Perhaps as an employer, I'll be more, as a candidate, I'll be looking more at the type of role and the type of opportunity. So you'll be fine by focusing more on a role or a function than only an industry. If you're linking to an industry, as long as there's evidence, that's fine. So I think very few schools ask about alternate goals. And I think there are a number of reasons why they do. Duke is one school which asks about that. So is UNC Keene and Flagler. I think one reason is when you go to school, you go in with an idea that you're going to go along a particular career path, but sometimes your interests change. And they may want you to be flexible along that. The second reason is there could be accentuating circumstances like what we're currently experiencing, where recruitment itself is challenging. So if you're very fixated in a pandemic as such, or when there's a recession, service industries tend to get hit first. So in that sense, there's a possibility that you may not be able to fulfill your goal. So if you're very, very rigid, that you only want to be in a particular industry and certain things cannot happen for whatever reason, then you may be disappointed. So that's why schools ask whether you're flexible on your goals or no. Perhaps your short-term goal and long-term, you may have different short-term goals which eventually lead to the same long-term goal, because there are different paths anyway. So perhaps your long-term goals could be the same. Okay, very specific question. So I think you need to ask yourself why you need an MBA. So let's say you're an actual consulting, but you're consulting only at a local level. Let's say you enjoy the problem solving part of it, but you want to create a greater impact. Then perhaps that is your motivation to do an MBA. And you need to dwell into that. I think it would also help if you identify people who are actual consultants and who've actually made the sort of transition to the roles that you want. And if you can learn from them how they are able to contribute better, or if they've been studying a particular school and you want to follow a similar career path as them, then you give their reference as well. So I think I hope I've done a reasonable job at helping you identify a structure and an approach by which you can attack essays that you fear most. Don't fear an essay. All of it is just an opportunity for you to tell your story. When you're approaching essays, like I said, be concise, be clear on the message that you want to give to a school, be genuine, and read your essays. Just make sure that there are no errors in them. At the end of it, when you write your essay, just make sure it's a reflection of the sort of person you are and it conveys the messages that you want to deliver. Do it concisely. Good job. I wish you guys all the very best. Best of luck for round 1, and hopefully we'll see you soon.